All right, how is everyone doing today? Today we are going to read through Chapter 2 of Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. But this will not be a typical reading. We are not just going to read the words. We're going to talk about the meaning of words, the definition of words, and the meaning of phrases and the definition of phrases. So, if you are watching this live with me right now, then if you have a question, I really want you to ask it in the chat, because that's what makes this unusual or more interesting, is that we can stop and talk about words or phrases and talk about their meaning, if they're common or uncommon words. So that's really part of the fun, and that's why I encourage you. I really do want you to make questions in the comments. It makes it much more interesting. Okay. Now, we got off to a rough start the other day when we started Chapter 1 because this book starts in a laboratory. It starts with some people giving, it seems like students or trainees, a tour of a laboratory. So there were a lot of technical scientific words. And I think that will continue at least a little bit in Chapter 2, because at the end of Chapter 1, the person said, okay, that's enough tour for today. And somebody said, oh wait, show us one more thing. I don't remember what they mentioned. And the tour guide, the man in charge, said, oh, okay. So he's taking them to one more place in the facilities. And that's where we stopped. So let's see. Mr. Foster was left in the decanting room, the DHC, and his students stepped into the nearest lift and were carried up to the 5th floor. Infant nurseries, neo-Pavlovian conditioning rooms, announced the notice board. Well, a nursery is a place where you keep babies. So that's like a baby's room. If you go to a nursery in a hospital, that would be the area where they keep all of the babies. But in a home, a nursery is where the baby sleeps and where the baby stays most of the day. That's the nursery. Probably you know who Pavlov was, but in the beginning of the book, let's just... What page is this? This is page 20. Let's just go back to the very first page of the book for a minute, because I forget the name of the building where they are, but that becomes important right now. Now, the name of the building is the Central London Hatchery and Conditioning Center. And I've never read this book. I don't know what it's about. I just heard that it's interesting. That's why I chose it. But, when you see hatchery, hatching is... And I showed you this the other day when we talked about this word. That's how a chicken or a bird is born. They're in an egg, and then they fight their way out of the egg. They hatch from the egg. So, judging by the name London Hatchery, I thought, oh, things are born there. I don't know what is born there, but things are born there because they hatch. And then there was this word conditioning, and I said, well, this sounds a little bit interesting, because conditioning to me is kind of like a psychological process where someone tries to change your behavior. Maybe you want them to. Maybe you're afraid of flying in an airplane, so you see a psychologist, and they use a method called conditioning to help you fly in an airplane. Okay, or it could be bad. It could be they don't like your behavior, and they condition you to stop your behavior even if you don't want to. So conditioning could be good or bad. So and I didn't know what that meant, because conditioning can mean other things too, but that's what I guessed. I guessed that the name of the building, London Hatchery and Conditioning Center, things are born there, and they also do things to change or shape behavior there. And I think now that is confirmed, because when we go to page 20 here, let's go up. Where is it? Hello, Hadi. How are you doing this morning? Let's find page 20. Okay. Infant nurseries. So the sign on the fifth floor, when you leave the elevator, it says infant nurseries and neo-Pavlovian conditioning rooms. And Pavlov was a Russian behavioral scientist about, I don't know, 120 years ago or something like that. Oh no, not that long ago. Well, I don't know. Doesn't matter. But he's famous for discovering that animals could associate certain events with certain sounds, because he used to ring a bell and his dogs would come ready for food. Every time they heard the bell, they thought of food. So he's kind of famous for understanding how to shape behavior. So when you see neo-Pavlovian, what is it? Neo-Pavlovian conditioning rooms. Neo means new. So they took his idea, his basic idea of associating something good or something bad with a sound, and they've changed it a little bit. That's why they call it neo. It's new, but it's based on this idea. So infant nurseries and neo-Pavlovian conditioning rooms, announced the notice board. So they have babies up there, but also they try to shape people's behavior up there using a certain process. Okay, the director opened the door, and they were in a large, bare room. Bare means not very much, not very many things. So if it's a bare room, probably it's almost an empty room. Maybe there's a desk and a chair or something, but nothing else. It's very bare. Bare means not very much, almost naked. Very bright and sunny. For the whole of the southern wall was a single window. Half a dozen nurses, trousered and jacketed in regulation white viscous linen uniform, their hair aseptically hidden under white caps. Septic means like dirt or contamination. So if something is, he's saying that something is aseptically hidden, it means maybe they're wearing some kind of hat or something to prevent their hair from, or to prevent their body from causing contamination or dirt. Trousers are pants, by the way. Half a dozen nurses, trousered, so wearing pants, and jacketed in a regulation white viscose linen. Let's see what the word viscose means. Oh, it's just a type of artificial material. The other word for it is rayon. I'm familiar with that word, rayon. I've never seen this word viscose before, but it's a synthetic type of material for clothes, like polyester. I think it's like polyester. I don't know what the difference is between rayon and polyester. Who cares? Let's see. The director opened a door. They were in a large bare room, very bright and sunny, and for the whole of the southern wall was a single window. So the southern wall was just one big window, one large piece of glass. Half a dozen nurses. Remember, a dozen is 12, so half a dozen is 6. Trousered and jacketed in the regulation white viscose linen uniform, their hair aseptically hidden under white caps. So they were wearing white caps, aseptically hidden, so that their hair or the dirt in their hair wouldn't contaminate anything, make it dirty. Were engaged in setting out bowls of roses in a long row across the floor. Big bowls packed tight with blossom. Do you remember, we better take a look at that, when we talked about the word bud? Hadi says viscosity deals with rheological characteristics of liquid. Okay. Well, we talked about that word viscous the other day when we started the book, because it talks about how thick something is, how thick and sticky something is. So honey, I guess you could say honey is very viscous. It's very thick and sticky. But here, viscose refers to a type of artificial material. Wait, let's see. Let's look at a picture of it. Which, now that I know what it is, I can imagine nurses or doctors wearing this in a hospital. But this actually refers to a type of material. This is viscose material. So it's not viscous, which means thick and sticky, but viscose, which maybe that's something that they use in the UK, but I've never heard it before. But it's used to talk about a type of artificial material. Artificial meaning not like cotton or silk that's natural, but something more plasticky, I guess you could say. Okay, but let's look at the word. The other day we were talking about the word bud. Do you remember that, talking about the word bud? Let me find a picture. So remember, a bud is the flower on the flower on the left. It's like a baby flower. It's still green. It's not beautiful yet. And the flower on the right is a budding flower. It's starting to look beautiful. It's starting to become a flower now. So the green one is a bud. It's like a baby flower. And you can use that in different ways. A budding idea is an idea growing in your head, or just at the start, or but the word bloom, that's a mature flower. So here's a bloomed flower. So that's a flower that has reached 100%. It's mature. You can see in this picture. Let's see. You can see this flower from bud, that's the green one, all the way to a fully bloomed flower, that's the big red one at the final stage. How did they use bloom here? The director opened a door. Hadi says an initial stage of a flower. Yes, so bud is like the beginning part of a flower, and bloom, that's like the fun. That's the middle stage of the flower when it's big and beautiful. Because I guess the final stage is death. I don't know what that's called. Wilting. I guess you could call it a wilting flower. Okay, the director opened a door. And they were in a large, bare room, very bright and sunny, for the whole of the southern wall was a single window. Half a dozen nurses, trousered and jacketed in the regulation white viscose linen uniform, their hair aseptically hidden under white caps, were engaged in setting out bowls of roses in long rows across the floor. So the nurses were placing bowls with roses in them everywhere. It says in rows, so in long lines across the floor. That sounds strange. Big bowls packed tight with blossom. So the big bowls were packed tight with the mature flower, with the full flower, full and big and red. Can we use flowering for bloom? Hadi is asking, we can use flowering for bloom or blossom. You could, but the problem is, probably if you're talking about flowering and you're talking about a flower, that would be very repetitive and sound bad. The flower is flowering, so it would be better to say the flower is blooming. But if you're talking about a person, like she is flowering. Okay, well, let's look at this for a minute. If you're talking about a person maturing, you could say blooming or flowering also. That would be like maybe someone between the ages of 16 and 18, or maybe even around 20. And if you say she is flowering, meaning that period of her life when she's becoming mature and very beautiful, if you say the word flower, you're focusing on beauty. Wow, she's really flowering. That sounds like she's really becoming very beautiful, because flowers are beautiful. But when you use the word blooming, it's really just to focus on, oh, she's growing, she's maturing, and there isn't this focus on beauty that you could get with flower. Does that make sense to you? But if you're talking about an actual flower, that would sound a little bit repetitive. The flower is flowering. So technically it's true and it's right, but it would be better to use blooming there. Thousands of petals. The petal is the individual. Well, we should. I think it's easier to show you a picture than to try to explain it to you. But it's like the individual piece of the individual leaf of a flower. So where is it? So this is a flower petal. That's a flower petal. Thousands of petals, ripe, blown, and silkily smooth, like the cheeks of innumerable cherubs. So these are cheeks, and a cherub, in case you don't know, I better find a picture of a cherub for you. That's something you see quite a bit. They're like little baby angels. You see that a lot in European art. So this is a cherub. It's like a little baby angel. Thousands of petals, ripe, blown, and silkily smooth, like the cheeks of innumerable little cherubs. But of cherubs in that bright light, not exclusively pink and Aryan, but also luminously Chinese, also Mexican, also apoplectic, with too much blowing of celestial trumpets. Now let's define that word, apoplectic, which means like feeling despair or hopelessness, but I don't trust my definition. Apoplectic meaning. That's kind of a fancy word, but you do hear it sometimes. Overcome with anger, extremely indignant, related to or denoting apoplexy. So so the babies, there are a lot of babies in this room apparently, from what I can understand, and they're kind of annoyed by all the attention, it seems. And these are babies of different races. There's some Mexican babies and Asian babies and Caucasian babies. Also pale as death, pale with posthumous whiteness of marble. The nurses stiffened to attention as the DHC came in. "Set out the books," he said curtly. In silence, the nurses obeyed his command. Between the rose bowls, the books were duly set out. A row of nursery quartos opened invitingly, each at some gaily colored image of beast or fish or bird. A quarto? What is a quarto? Nursery quarto. Quarto. What? Quarto print. Seems like they use it in Spanish more than they use it in English. It has something to do with. Let's see. Definition. Hadi says, "Can we say friendly address someone with word petal?" Can you explain that a little bit more? I'm not sure what you mean when you say, "Can we say friendly address someone with the word petal?" Like hello petal, like that? Do you mean like that? Quarto is a size of book page resulting from folding each printed sheet into 4 leaves. Okay, so it's just a process of bookmaking. Quarto, like maybe you recognize that word from quarter. So the way that they make the book is they fold a large page into 4 pages or something like that. I think it's not a terribly necessary word to know. Set out the books, he said curtly, and curtly... Let's define curtly. Not a terribly common word, but it's something that you could maybe encounter sometimes. Curtly, in a way that is very quick and perhaps a little bit rude. Hadi says posthumous post-death. That's right. That means after you die. Set out the books, he said curtly. So he said that very quickly, and it was a little bit rude. In silence, the nurses obeyed his command. Between the rose bowls, the books were duly set out. A row of nursery quartos opened invitingly each at some gaily colored image of beast or fish or bird. Now bring in the children. They hurried in out of the room and returned in a minute or two, each pushing a kind of tall, dumb waiter laden on all of its 4 wire-netted shelves with 8-month-old babies. This is getting weird. Okay, here's a dumbwaiter. This is what a dumbwaiter is. A dumbwaiter is like a little closet elevator. It's like a little baby elevator, let's say. So if you're very rich and you live in a big house, it's possible that you have a dumbwaiter. So it's like an elevator that you put things in. So imagine you cook something down. Maybe the kitchen is on the lower floor, and then you put the food in the dumbwaiter, and then you press a button, and the elevator goes up, and the person on the other floor can take the food or whatever it is. That's what a dumbwaiter is used for. It could also be used in hospitals or other types of buildings like that. You can put small objects in there, press a button, and the objects will go up to another floor. That's a dumbwaiter. Dumb, by the way, means can't talk. So that's what dumbwaiter means. It's like a waiter that doesn't talk to you. Let's see. Where's the dumbwaiter? They hurried out of the room and returned in a minute or two, each pushing a kind of tall dumbwaiter laden. So this sounds like a cart, though. It sounds like a cart. Let me see if maybe in the UK they use dumbwaiter in a different way. Well, okay. No. That's the only thing I see are pictures of what I've already showed to you, the elevator. But it sounds like they're pushing a cart. So maybe that's an older way of using the word dumbwaiter that people don't use anymore. I don't know. But let's imagine a cart, because it says they're each pushing a dumbwaiter, so they must be pushing a cart. They hurried out of the room and returned in a minute or two, each pushing a kind of tall dumbwaiter laden. Laden means full. Laden on all its 4 wire-netted shelves with 8-month babies. So each person is pushing a cart, sounds like, with 4 levels, and on each level is a baby of 8 months. All exactly alike. A Bokanovsky group, it was evident, and all, since their caste was Delta, dressed in khaki. The infants were... put them down on the floor. The infants were unloaded. Now, turn them so that they can see the flowers and the books. Turned. The babies at once fell silent and then began to crawl towards the clusters of sleek colors. How do you define that word sleek, I wonder? Sleek means, to me, sleek means kind of, I don't know. I don't know how to say that word. I don't know how to define that. Sleek. It's always used in a good way. Shiny? Yeah, glossy as if polished. Sleek dark hair, having a smooth, well-groomed look. Sleek cattle. So if something is sleek, it's shiny. Turned, the babies at once fell silent and then began to crawl towards the clusters. Clusters means like groups. Groups of sleek colors, of shiny colors. Those shapes so gay and brilliant. Gay means happy. So these were happy colors. And brilliant, meaning again very bright and shiny. On the white pages. As they approached, the sun came out of a momentary eclipse behind a cloud. The roses flamed up as though with a sudden passion from within. A new and profound significance seemed to suffuse the shining pages of the books from the ranks of the crawling babies. Like squeals of excitement and gurgles of twitterings of pleasure. Okay, well, squeal is the sound of a pig. Wee, wee, wee. So anything that makes a sound like the pig could be called a squeal. It's a high-pitched noise. That's kind of a squeal. So the babies were squealing with excitement. And gurgling. Gurgling is the sound of liquid in your throat. So you can picture a baby squealing and then gurgling. And Twitter, well, of course, you know the website Twitter. What is the symbol, or the X website Twitter? What is the symbol of Twitter is a bird. Because Twitter is kind of the sound of a bird. There are other words like chirp. But Twitter could be like... That's the kind of sound of a twitter. So the babies would squeal and gurgle and twitter. That's twittering. The director rubbed his hands. Excellent, he said. It might almost have been done on purpose. The swift means fast, by the way. The swiftest crawlers, and crawling is how babies move. The swiftest crawling were already at their goal. Grasped, unpedaling the transfigured roses, crumpling the illuminated pages of the books. Wait a minute. I just want to reread that again. The swiftest crawlers were already at their goal. So they put the babies on the floor, and the babies are crawling across the room. And they were already at their goal, which I guess were the flowers and the books. Small hands reached out uncertainly, touched, grasped, unpedaling. So remember, a petal is one individual part of the flower. So the babies were taking apart the roses, unpedaling them. Unpedaling the transfigured means change. Rose, crumpling the illuminated pages of the book. This is crumpling. This is crumpling paper. The director waited until all were happily busy, and then, "Watch carefully," he said, and lifting his hand, he gave the signal. The head nurse, who was standing by a switchboard at the other end of the room, pressed down a little lever. A switchboard, in case you don't know, I better show you a picture of a switchboard. A switchboard is like a control center. Maybe if you're familiar with computer terminology, you probably know dashboard. And switchboard is also a similar kind of thing, except I think it's a little bit more technical. This is a switchboard. These are switchboards. It's like a control center. Hadi says sleek also means slim. No, slim means skinny, and sleek means shiny. Let me just check, but I don't really see a connection between sleek and slim. Maybe you look sleek if you're slim. Sleek is smooth and glossy as if polished. Sleek dark hair having a smooth, well-groomed look. Sleek cattle. It just means that they look shiny and clean. If you say that something is sleek, it looks shiny and clean. But if you say slim, slenderly built, skinny, very small. Yeah, there's no relationship as far as I can see. I didn't think that there was, but you never know. That's why it's good to check. But no, I wouldn't say that those are similar. The director rubbed his hands. Excellent, he said. It might almost have been done on purpose. The swiftest crawlers were already at their goal. Small hands reached out uncertainly, touched, grasped, unpedaling, and they transfigured robes, crumpling the illuminated pages of the book. The director waited until they were all happily busy. Now watch carefully, he said, and lifting his hand, he gave the signal. The head nurse, who was standing by a switchboard at the other end of the room, pressed down a little lever. Lever, I better show you a picture of a lever. Control lever, let's see. So a lever is this type of mechanism, part of a machine usually. You could imagine this on a switchboard. These are levers. Lever, lever, lever. So a lever is like a long stick. You turn things on and off or change the intensity of something. Hadi says, what is the word for water swishing around in your mouth and then spit it out? Is that... No, gurgling... If you just put it in your mouth and you swish it around, I would call that rinsing, probably, as a verb. But gurgling is when you when you let the water come down to here. And the reason it's called gurgling, it's because of the noise that it makes. That's because it's down here and you're moving it around to clean your throat or whatever. But if you just keep it inside your mouth, that is not gurgling, because that does not make the same sound. And the reason it's called gurgle is because of the sound. It's a funny word for a funny sound. The head nurse, who was standing by a switchboard at the other end of the room, pressed down a little lever. There was a violent explosion. Shriller, and ever shriller, a siren shrieked. Alarm bells maddeningly sounded. The children started. Remember, this is not start like begin. This is start as surprise. The children started, screamed. Their faces were distorted with terror. And now, the director shouted, for the noise was deafening, now we proceed to rub in the lesson with a mild electric shock. He waved his hand again, and the head nurse pressed a second lever. The screaming of the baby suddenly changed in its tone. There was something desperate, almost insane, about the sharp, spasmodic yelps to which they now gave utterance. Yelping is... How would you describe yelping? I'm thinking of a dog when I think of yelping. Like, oh, oh, oh. That's kind of a yelping sound. But I think, let's see what Google says. A short, sharp cry, especially of pain or alarm. Oh, oh. I guess that's kind of a yelping, right? I don't know why I picture a dog. But, so the babies were making this sound. Very short, loud sounds of pain. There was something desperate, almost insane, about the sharp, spasmodic yelps to which they now gave utterance. Their little bodies twitched and stiffened, their limbs moved jerkily, as if to the tug of unseen wires. To jerk is this kind of movement. Very fast and very, very quick. Not very big, kind of small. So if somebody gives you electric shock, you might be jerking. Jerking is just a quick movement like that. So the limbs are the arms and the legs. Their limbs jerked. And tugging means pulling. So their limbs moved jerkily, as if to the tug of unseen wires. So it looked like somebody was pulling wires, making the babies move their arms and legs. We can electrify the whole strip of floor, bawled the director in explanation, but that's enough, he signaled to the nurse. The explosion ceased, the bells stopped ringing, the shriek of the siren died down from tone to tone into silence. The stiffly twitching bodies, that's similar to jerking, relaxed, and what had become the sob and yelp of infant maniacs broadened out once more into a normal howl of ordinary terror. Offer them the flowers and the books again. The nurses obeyed. But at the approach of the roses, at the mere sight of those gaily colored images of Pussy and Cock-a-doodle-doo, Pussy is a cat, and Cock-a-doodle-doo is the sound of a rooster. So he's talking about pictures of cats and roosters. And the ba-ba, black sheep. The infants shrank away in horror. To shrink means to become smaller. So if you shrink away in fear or horror, it's like you make yourself smaller to protect yourself. The volume of their howling suddenly increased. Observe, said the doctor triumphantly. Observe. Books and loud noises, flowers and electric shocks. Already in the infant mind, these couples were compromisingly linked, and after 200 repetitions of the same or of similar lesson would be wedded indissolubly. Oh, wow. Okay, so maybe you know the word to dissolve, which means that one thing goes into another thing and they become like mixed together in a way that's inseparable. So indissoluble. Let's look at that. This is not a word that you have to use in your life. Dissoluble. Let's start with dissoluble. Able to dissolve, loosen, or disconnect. Indissol. Unable to destroy. I think in this way, unable to separate. Wedded, of course, like you know the word wedding, come together. Wedded means come together or be attached. So he's saying after 20 more times, the babies will never be able to separate the idea of a book and an electric shock, or the idea of a flower petal and an electric shock. What man has joined, nature is powerless to put asunder. Okay, that's a funny word, asunder. Let's say it means divide. So what man has joined, nature cannot divide. Nature cannot take it apart. It's not an important word to know, put asunder. They'll grow up with what these psychologists used to call an instinctive hatred of books and flowers. Reflexes unalterably conditioned. They'll be safe from books and botany all their lives. The director turned to his nurses. Take them away again. Still yelling, the khaki babies were loaded onto their dumbwaiters and wheeled out, leaving behind them the smell of sour milk and a most welcome silence. One of the students held up his hand, and though he could see quite well why you couldn't have lower caste people wasting the community's time over books, that there were always the risk of their reading something which might undesirably decondition one of their reflexes. Yet, well, he couldn't understand about the flowers. Why go through the trouble of making it psychologically possible for deltas to like flowers? Patiently, the DHC explained, if the children were made to scream at the sight of a rose, that was on the grounds of high economic policy. Not so very long ago, a century or thereabouts, gammas, deltas, and epsilons had to be conditioned to like flowers. Flowers in particular, and wild nature in general. The idea was to make them want to be going out into the country at every available opportunity. And so compel them to consume transport. And didn't they consume transport? Consume here means like pay for, buy, use up your money. So didn't they pay for bus tickets? Didn't they pay for train tickets to go out into nature? Something like that. Quite a lot, the DHC replied, but nothing else. Primroses and landscapes, he pointed out, have one grave defect. They are gratuitous. A love of nature keeps no factories busy. When something is gratuitous, that word gratuitous comes from gratis, which means free. And gratuitous means unnecessary. Like, it's there for you, it's extra, but it isn't necessary. So beauty is gratuitous for them because it's there and it's nice to have it there, but it doesn't add anything. It's not useful. Beauty is not useful to them because they're supposed to be working in factories, and beauty does not produce better products. So primroses and landscapes, he pointed out, have one grave defect. They are gratuitous. They are extra and unnecessary for the task. A love of nature keeps no factories busy. It was decided to abolish the love of nature, at any rate among the lower classes, to abolish the love of nature, but not the tendency to consume transport. For of course it was essential that they should keep on going to the country, even though they hated it. The problem was to find an economically sounder reason for consuming transport than a mere affection for primroses and landscapes. It was duly found. We condition the masses to hate the country, concluded the director, but simultaneously we condition them to love all country sports. At the same time, we see to it that all country sports shall entail the use of elaborate apparatus, so that they consume manufactured articles as well as transport. Hence the electric shocks. So they're raising these babies to be consumers, to be customers, to pay for things, but only very specific things that they think will be useful. They want them to consume things. I guess it doesn't matter if they're useful, but but also while training them to dislike other things that are inconvenient for the ruling class. There was a silence and then a clearing in his throat. Clearing his throat, that's... So there was a silence and then a clearing of his throat. Once upon a time, the director began, while our Ford was still on Earth, There was a little boy called Reuben Rubinovich. Reuben was the child of Polish-speaking parents. The director interrupted himself. You know what Polish is, I suppose? A dead language? Like French and German, added another student, officiously showing off his learning. And parent? Questioned. So he's saying once there was a boy named Reuben and his parents were Polish. Do you know what Polish is? Oh yeah, that's a dead language, Polish. Like German or French is also a dead language. And so they're talking about things that don't exist anymore or that are obsolete or that are part of history. And then another student says, and parents? Meaning, what are parents? What is that? There was an uneasy silence. Several of the boys blushed. They had not yet learned to draw the significant, but often very fine distinction between smut and pure science. One, at last, had the courage to raise his hand. Smut. Smut is associated with pornography. Smut is something dirty, and it's usually used as a synonym for pornography. Let's see how Google defines smut. Smut, a noun for sexual material. Yeah. So smut could mean dirty, but it usually means like dirty in a sexual way, like disgusting pictures or disgusting movies or something like that, or jokes. And I think that they consider parents as being smutty. Like it's very clean. It's very clean and scientific to create a baby in a laboratory. But creating a baby in the old-fashioned sense in this book is considered smutty, like very bad, very dirty, like pornographic, very low. I think that's what they mean by this. Wait, let's see. There was an uneasy silence. Several of the boys blushed. They had not yet learned to draw the significant but often very fine distinction between smut and pure science. One at last had the courage to raise their hand. Human beings used to be... He hesitated. The blood rushed to his cheeks. Well, they used to be... Hadi, are you still here? We have viviparous again. Remember that word, viviparous? We had to learn that word the other day, which means a viviparous animal is an animal that grows inside its mother until it's ready to come out. So babies, human babies are viviparous. Or humans are viviparous. Well, they used to be viviparous. Quite right, the director nodded approvingly. And when the babies were decanted, born, came the correction. Well, then they were the parents, not the babies, of course. The other ones. The poor boy was overwhelmed with confusion. In brief, the director summed up, the parents were the father and the mother. The smut that was really science fell into a crash. The smut that was really science fell with a crash into the boy's eye-avoiding silence. Gosh, I'm not really sure what that sentence means. The smut that was really science fell with a crash into the boy's eye-avoiding silence. Mother, he repeated loudly, rubbing in the science and leaning back in his chair. I don't understand these sentences. These, he said gravely, are unpleasant facts. I know it. But then most historical facts are unpleasant. He returned to little Reuben, in whose room, one evening, by an oversight, his father and mother, crash, happened to leave the radio turned on. For you must remember that in those days of gross viviparous reproduction, children were always brought up by their parents and not in the state conditioning centers. While the child was asleep, a broadcast program from London suddenly started to come through, and the next morning, to the astonishment of his crash, the more daring of the boys ventured to grin at one another. I don't really understand what's happening here. Maybe you're not supposed to understand, and later things will become more apparent, but I'm not sure why they keep saying crash and crash. Little Reuben woke up repeating word for word a long lecture by that curious old writer, one of the very few whose work had been permitted to come down to us, George Bernard Shaw, who was speaking, according to a well-authenticated tradition, about his own genius. Farabors says, greetings from Vancouver. Hi, Farabors. How are you doing today? To little Reuben's wink and snigger. Wink is this. That's winking. So to little Reuben's wink and sniggering is kind of like a funny little laugh, like an embarrassed little laugh, like that's sort of sniggering. This lecture was, of course, perfectly incomprehensible, and imagining that their child had suddenly gone mad, they sent for a doctor. He fortunately understood English and recognized the discourse as that which Shaw had broadcasted the previous evening, realized the significance of what had happened, and sent a letter to the medical press about it. So the baby fell asleep listening to an English broadcast of a very famous author, George Bernard Shaw. And I guess in the morning, the baby was repeating the words that he heard from the broadcast. The baby spoke Polish, but he was using English because he had heard the broadcast. The parents didn't understand what was happening because they didn't know English. And so when their baby started talking in a strange way, they took it to the doctor. But the doctor knew English, so he understood immediately what happened, and then he reported it to whoever in the government. The principle of sleep teaching, or hypnopedia, had been discovered. The DH made an impressive pause. The principle had been discovered, but many, many years were to elapse before that principle was usefully applied. The case of little Reuben occurred only 23 years after our Ford's first T model was put on the market. So I guess we could say that this must be somewhere between like 1925 and 1935 that they're talking about. Here the director made a sign of the T on his stomach. But the Ford Model T, if you don't know that wasn't the first car, but it was like the first car that was mass produced and was very affordable. So anybody could buy it. And I think that they started making those around 1925. Well, let's take a look. When did the Model T start being sold? Ford Model T. They started producing the Model T in 1908, and they stopped producing it in 1927. But I just know that the 1920s, I think that was like the most common car, and everybody bought one because Ford had discovered a way to produce them very quickly using an assembly line and very cheaply. So that was the famous thing. Anybody could buy one. And so it seems like they treat this as sort of a religious phenomenon that he can produce because they're going back to they named their years after Ford and when the Model T started. So it's like their religious event, their big religious event that this happened. Let's see, the case of little Reuben occurred only 23 years after our Fords. See, they've changed the dating system recently because in the West, you could talk about the period before Christ, that was BC. Now they call it before the Common Era. But and they still use the same numbering system, but they just call it something different. And then you have AD, which is after Christ, which stands for Anno Domini, which means in the year of our Lord. And so they seem to be taking that the case of Little Reuben occurred only 23 years after our Ford's first. So instead of our Lord, it's our Ford. So I think there's a little joke in there that Ford or cars or technology is the new religion. So instead of the year of our Lord, like you would call, well, you can't do this anymore. People will get offended, but this year would be the year of our Lord 2024. That would be the way that you would say it. But now they're saying the year of our Ford. Farabor says because of mainstream at the time. Yeah, well, that's how people thought. But definitely I think this book was written in the 1930s. So definitely people were still saying in the year of our Lord back then. So they understood very easily this little joke, the year of our Ford. Maybe that's not so obvious now, but it was definitely obvious back then. Okay, let's see. The case of Little Reuben occurred only 23 years after our Ford's first T model was put on the market. Okay, well, so if the Model T was put on the market first in 1908, then that means that the year we're talking about is 1931. Okay, here the director made a sign of the T on his stomach. So Christian would make or Catholic anyway, would make the sign of a cross, but these people make the sign of a T. So this is a religion to them. This manufacturing of products and selling them is a religion to them. And they make the sign of the T instead of the sign of the cross. So here the director made the sign of the T on his stomach, and all the students reverently followed suit. Furiously, the students scribbled Hypnopedia, first used officially in AF. So remember, traditional marking of years would be AD, Anno Domini, which means in the year of our Lord. But here it's Anno Ford, 2014. Why not before? 2 reasons. Farabors is saying the author used a simile. Well, I guess it could be a simile, but usually a simile I think is like a vocalized thing. So when you say this is like this, I can't think of any. Wait, let's take a look. A simile is when you compare two things that are different, but you create an image that they're similar. So, like as busy as a bee, as innocent as a lamb, as proud as a peacock. I'm not sure exactly if that's what they're doing here. That's a very literary kind of issue. Maybe it is. Maybe I just don't understand simile very well. But maybe it could be that abstract. I'm not sure. Let's see. So furiously, the students scribbled Hypnopedia, first used officially in AF 214. Why not before? 2 reasons. These early experiments, the DHC was saying, were on the wrong track. Okay, to be on the wrong track means to be going in the wrong direction. So if something is in the right track, it means it's going in the right direction, it's going in the right way. But if something is on the wrong track, it means they're following something that isn't actually correct. So it could be that they discovered this learning while sleeping, and they took that idea and they went in the wrong way with it. Like, yes, it works, but the way that they proceeded was wrong. So once they discovered that, they had to get on the right track. So they could move forward. They thought that Hypnopedia could be made an instrument of intellectual education. So that was their mistake. They learned, you can learn by sleeping. You can play things while you're sleeping and learn something. Let's use that to educate people. That was the wrong track. Now I think he will tell us what they decided was the right track. A small boy asleep on the right side, the right arm stuck out, the right hand hanging limp over the edge of the bed through a round grating in the side of the box. A voice speaks softly. Okay, limp means like very relaxed, not tense. It's kind of the opposite of tense, limp. So a small boy asleep on his right side, the right arm stuck out, and the right hand was hanging limp over the edge of the bed. So this is the opposite of limp, tense. This is limp. It's just hanging there. Through a round grating in the side of the bed, a voice speaks softly. The Nile is the longest river in Africa, and the second in length of all the rivers of the globe. Although falling short of the length of the Mississippi, Missouri, the Nile is at the head of all rivers as regards to length of its basin, which extends through 35 degrees of latitude. At breakfast the next morning, Tommy, someone says, "Do you know which is the longest river in Africa?" A shaking of the head. "But don't you remember something that begins?" The Nile is the longest river in Africa and the second in length of all the rivers of the globe. The words come rushing out. Although falling short of, well now. Which is the longest river in Africa? The eyes are blank. I don't know. But the Nile, Tommy. The Nile is the longest river in Africa and the second. Then which river is the longest, Tommy? Tommy bursts into tears. To burst means to explode. And tears, that's what happens when you cry. So, I don't know. He howls. That howl the director made it plain discouraged the earlier investigators. So you could learn things. You could absorb information in your sleep, but because it's done unconsciously, because you didn't make a conscious effort, it becomes difficult to process. You don't really process that information. You can repeat what you heard all night, but you don't process it or think about it. So if you could repeat what you heard, the Nile is the longest river in Africa. But if somebody asks you what is the longest river in Africa, you don't know because you just repeated that line, but you never processed it in your head. I think that's what's happening here. Meaning you didn't learn anything, you just memorized some sounds that you heard. The experiments were abandoned. No further attempt was made to teach children the length of the Nile in their sleep. Quite rightly, you can't learn a science unless you know what it is all about. Whereas, if they had only started on moral education, said the doctor, leading the way towards the door, the students followed him desperately, scribbling as they walked and all the way up in the lift. Moral education which ought never in any circumstances be rational. So they're saying you can't teach facts with this method of listening to information in your sleep, but you could teach morality because morality is never rational. So you could teach them to repeat these things. It doesn't matter if they make sense or if they process it because they just have to be able to repeat it. Silence, whispered. Silence, whispered a loudspeaker as they stepped out of the 14th floor. Silence. The trumpet mouths indefatigably repeated at intervals down the corridor. Fatigue means tired. So indefatigable means never gets tired. Can never get tired. So as they're walking down the hallway, through the speakers in the hallway, all they hear is silence. And it's indefatigable. It never gets tired. It continues. It always goes. The students and even the director himself rose automatically to the tips of their toes. They were alphas, of course. But even alphas have been well conditioned. Silence. Silence. All the air of the 14th floor was sibilant with categorical imperative. Wait, let's look at the word sibilant. I actually have been curious about this word and been meaning to look it up. But I'm lazy. But now I get a chance to. Sibilant. Making or characterized by a hissing sound. Hissing is what a cat does when it's scared or angry. That's a hissing sound. Snakes also hiss. That's the hiss of a snake. Ravneet Kaur says, hello. Hi, Ravneet. How are you doing today? We're just reading through this chapter. If you have questions, please ask them as we read, because that's the whole point, to stop and talk about interesting words or phrases. So sibilant is a hissing sound. Sound of a cat or a snake. Silence. Silence. All the air of the 14th floor was sibilant with the categorical imperative. 50 yards of tiptoeing brought them to the door, which the director cautiously opened. Okay, well, just in case you don't know what tiptoe is, I better show you a picture. This will work. This is walking on your tiptoes. Let's see if we can find another one. No, that's not a tippy toe. Oh, there's a tiptoe. That's walking on your tiptoes. So you do that usually if you want to be quiet. You walk on your tiptoes. You walk tippy-toed. And of course that's what they're doing, because all the speakers are saying, silence, silence. Ferrer Bors says, was sibilant the categorical imperative? Well, now imperative means that you have to do something. So the imperative was, don't make noise, silence. That's the imperative here, because imperative means do it. You have to do it. And categorical means like very clear imperative. Like they're telling you very clearly what you have to do. That's the categorical imperative. The sibilant part is because that word silence, which is repeated twice, silence, silence. That is the hiss, the sound of a snake or the sound of a cat, right? Do you know what a snake or a cat sounds like? That's the sibilant part. So that's very noticeable in the hallway. As you're walking down, you just hear the S's. Silence, silence, like that, I guess. That's what I'm imagining anyway. Hadi says, could you please define the expression on borrowed time? On borrowed time means that you have already, you already are supposed to do something and you haven't done it. When you borrow something, you're taking something, but you have to give it back. And to be on borrowed time means that you've already passed the deadline. Any minute, you're going to have to face the consequences. If someone goes to the hospital and they say, I'm sorry, you have cancer, you're going to die in 2 months, you can say, I'm living on borrowed time. Like, I don't know when I have to pay back the time. It's coming very soon, probably in 2 months, maybe earlier. So to be on borrowed time means you're already past the deadline. And you don't know how much time is left, but it isn't much. It's never a good thing to be on borrowed time. Okay, so the silence, that's a very sibilant word. It's very hissing. Hissing is the sound of a cat. Or a snake. And so the categorical imperative is it's very clear this is what they want you to do. So you don't make any noise in this hallway. Silence! Silence, whispered a loudspeaker as they stepped out of the 14th floor. Silence! Silence! The trumpet mouths indefatigably repeated the intervals down every corridor. The students, and even the director himself, rose automatically to the tips of their toes, so they're walking tippy-toe. They were alphas, of course, but alphas have been well-conditioned. Silence! Silence! All the air of the 14th floor was sibilant. So all the air was sibilant, full of s, with the categorical imperative, with that very clear order. 50 yards of tiptoeing brought them to a door, which the director cautiously opened. They stepped over the threshold. Threshold, by the way, is the space between two rooms. So when you walk through a doorway, that area where one room stops and the other room begins, that's the threshold of a door. So they're standing over the threshold into the twilight of a shuttered dormitory. Farabor says doorstep. Well, a step is usually at a different level than the other part. So if you say doorstep, there has to be, well, actually, I bet we could find a picture. I'm just seeing if I can find a picture comparing a doorstep to a threshold. Well, here, let's do it like this. Okay. This could be a doorstep and a threshold. It's a threshold because it's the end of one room and the beginning of another room. So it's like that transition place. But it's a doorstep because it goes up also. So they could be similar. They could be the same. But it just depends on if you're changing levels. Threshold is about changing from one place to another place, leaving one place and entering another place. So that's a door threshold. And doorstep means going from one level to another level. So going up or going down. Changing levels. Doorstep is about changing levels. Okay, over the threshold. Oh, I wanted to show you pictures of shutters. Okay, here's a picture of... Let me see if I can show this to you. Here's a picture of a house, and you have the door and the windows, and then you have these black things on the side. And these are like doors for the windows. And the reason that you would have that maybe could be for security, or it could be to protect you from very heavy winds or very bad weather. You close those, and the windows are protected, just like the door protects the entrance. And these are called shutters. You probably recognize that word from the word shut, which means closing. But those are shutters. And how did they use it here? So they stepped over the threshold into the twilight of a shuttered dormitory. So now what you can imagine, a dormitory, dorm, that means sleep. So dormitory is a place to sleep. That's usually used in schools where people live at the schools. The dormitory is where the students sleep. Could also be used for soldiers. But when you hear the word dormitory, you always think that many people sleep there. Not just one person, but many people. It's a place for many people to sleep, like in a school or in the military. So over the threshold into the twilight of a shuttered dormitory. So the dormitory has windows, but all of the shutters have been closed. So there's no light coming in, or very little light coming in. 80 cots stood in a row against the wall. A cot is a kind of temporary bed. Let's just take a look at it. This is a kind of a classic cot. This is what I picture when I think of cot. So it's sort of a temporary bed. Okay, 80 cots stood in a row against the wall. There was a sound of regular breathing, and a continuous murmur of very faint voices remotely whispering. A nurse rose as they entered and came to attention before the director. "What was the lesson this afternoon?" he asked. "We had elementary sex before..." "We had elementary sex for the first 40 minutes, she answered. I'm just laughing because, you use elementary to talk about basics, like basic education, but it also, the way it's phrased, it sounds like they did very basic sex with each other for the first 40 minutes. I'm sure that's not what's meant here, but it's just funny the way it's phrased. But now it's switched over to elementary class consciousness. The director walked slowly down the long line of cots. Rosy and relaxed with sleep, 80 little boys and girls lay softly breathing. There was a whisper under every pillow. The DHC halted and, bending over one of the little beds, listened attentively. "Elementary class consciousness, did you say? Let's have it repeated a little louder by the trumpet." At the end of the room, a loudspeaker projected from the wall. The director walked up to it and pressed a switch. "All wear green," said softly but very distinct voice, beginning in the middle of the sentence, "and Delta children wear khaki." "Oh no, I don't want to play with Delta children, and Epsilons are still worse. They're too stupid to be able to read or write. Besides, they wear black, which is such a beastly color. I'm so glad I'm a beta." Hadi says, "Threshold is the bottom of a door frame of the entrance when the door is fixed into the house and the frame turns into a threshold." Am I right? I think technically you're right, but I think it's better to think of threshold as being the end of one place and the beginning of another place, because you could use that word very commonly as an abstract word. Like, I'm on the threshold of a discovery. What does that mean? That's not about the frame of a house, but that's about being in one place, and then just when you step over into the other room, you're in a new place. We're on the threshold of something amazing. That means you're still in the bad room, but you're just going to take one step, and then suddenly you're in this new room where everything is different. So I think that's why it's good to think of threshold not technically as part of a house, but as just being in one space and then taking another step and being in a completely different space, because that's how you would mostly use it in English. Oh, and Ferrabors says, like, a patient's threshold is high or low. Yes, that's used, like, for example, a pain threshold. Like, you can tolerate a little pain, but so there's one point where the pain becomes so horrible that you can't tolerate it anymore, and that is your pain threshold. It's like you walk from one room, the room where you can tolerate, to another room, the room where you can't tolerate. It's used to talk about a place where change can happen very easily just by taking a step, either good or bad. Alpha children wear gray. They work much harder than we do because they're so frightfully clever. I'm really awfully glad I'm a beta because I don't work so hard, and then we are much better than the gammas and deltas. Gammas are stupid. They all wear green, and deltas wear khaki. Oh no, I don't want to play with delta children, and epsilons are still worse. They're too stupid to be able to. The director pushed back the switch. The voice was silent. Only its thin ghost continued to mutter from beneath the 80 pillows. They'll have that repeated 40 or 50 times more before they wake. Then again on Thursday and again on Saturday. 123 times a week for 30 months, after which they go on to more advanced lessons. Hadia saying watershed versus threshold. I think that they're different. Let me just... That word watershed is not something that I would use very much, but I think I know the difference. I just want to confirm, though. Just let me see. I guess they could be considered similar. I think that threshold is probably something more common than using watershed. And I think that watershed is used mostly for very extremely significant things that happen, or very significant changes. But threshold could be for anything. So I think it's used more frequently, threshold. Okay, roses and electric shocks, the khaki of deltas and a whiff of asafoetida. What is that, asafoetida? Whiff means like smells. That's a whiff. A whiff of asafoetida. What is that? Let's just say it's an herbal smell. Because it says it's a Eurasian plant with parsley, plant of the parsley family, from which this gum is obtained. So it's some kind of material. Oh, actually, it says it's used very common in herbal medicine and Indian cooking. Asafoetida. Let's see if a picture... Oh, I don't recognize it at all. Let's see, do they use this in Pakistan? I don't recognize that, but that's asafoetida. Oh, but then maybe when they make a spice, they ground it up, and it looks like this. Oh well, so for some reason, the dormitory smells like that. Okay, they'll have repeated 40 or 50 times more before they wake. Then again on Thursday and again on Saturday. 120 times, 3 times a week for 30 months, after which they go on to a more advanced lesson. Roses and electric shocks, the khaki of deltas and the whiff of asafoetida. Ravneet Kaur says this is used in cooking in India. Do you call it asafoetida? I've never heard of that before. I don't even know if I'm saying it correctly. Wait, let me check the pronunciation. I probably am not saying it correctly. Let's see.
Asafoetida.
Asafoetida. Asafoetida. Roses and electric shocks, the khaki of deltas, and a whiff of asafoetida, wedded indissolubly before the child can speak. But wordless conditioning is crude and wholesale, cannot bring home the finer distinctions, cannot inculcate the more complex courses of behavior. For that there must be words, but words without reason. In brief, hypnopedia. The students took it down in their little blue books, straight from the horse's mouth. Remember, straight from the horse's mouth means directly from the person who knows, or directly from the person who decides, or directly from the person who is the number one authority about the subject. Once more the director touched the switch. So frightfully clever, the soft, insinuating, indefatigable voice was saying, I'm really awfully glad I'm a beta, because not so much like drops of water, though water, it is true, can wear holes in the hardest granite, rather drops of liquid sealing wax. Drops that adhere, encrust, incorporate themselves with what they fall on, and finally the rock is one scarlet blob. I think what he's saying is those words are they drip into the brain like water, but it really isn't like water, it's more like wax. So it's like a coating or covering of the brain with these ideas. Till at last the child's mind is these suggestions, and the sum of these suggestions is the child's mind. And not the child's mind only, the adult's mind too. All his life long, the mind that judges and desires and decides, made up of these suggestions, but all these suggestions are our suggestions. The director almost shouted in his triumph. Suggestions from the state! He banged the nearest table. It therefore follows. A noise made him turn round. Oh, Ford! So they keep doing this, where, in typical English you would say, oh, God! But instead of saying God, they use Ford. Oh, Ford! So Ford is their God. A corporation is their God. He said in another tone, I've gone and woken the children. Oh, Ford. Oh, Ford. We're finished with chapter 2. So next time we will move on to chapter 3. I think that chapter 2 was much better, not so much scientific language. So hopefully, as we progress into the story more, we'll get out of the laboratory and we won't have to worry so much about scientific vocabulary. But so that was chapter 2, and next time we will take a look very soon of chapter 3. And I thank you everybody for staying and watching the entire time. And I hope that when we do chapter 3, you will come back and watch again. It's been really fun. And I will see you next time. Okay? Bye-bye.